Samsung's Ultra branding is typically reserved for devices that pack as much tech and high-end features as you can fit in a single gadget. Starting at $1,200, you get a big, beautiful OLED screen, a new chip with even better performance, improved cameras, and some revamped software. And of course, it also has a built-in S Pen for all your drawing and note-taking needs. So while that sentiment still generally rings true for the new S23 Ultra, at the same time, the company's latest flagship phone doesn't look or function all that differently from last year's. While the standard S23 and S23 Plus got a facelift this year, which gives the entire line a bit more familial resemblance, the Ultra appears to be a carbon copy of its predecessor, unless you look real close. You get a big 6.8-inch AMOLED display with 120Hz adaptive refresh rate and a 3088 by 1440 resolution. And it looks awesome, even if those specs haven't changed much from the previous model. Colors are dazzling, and brightness tops out at a stunning 1750 nits, with a typical max brightness of around 1000 nits in my testing. As for the rest of the phone, you get a nice combo of Gorilla Glass Victus 2, Samsung's durable armor aluminum, and a few minor tweaks to the phone's chassis. The edges of the screen have a tiny bit less of a curve to them to help prevent accidental touches. That said, I never really had an issue with that on last year's phone. The S23 Ultra's frame is also a bit flatter, which makes the whole thing feel a bit boxier than before. And thanks to Samsung's continued focus on sustainability, small elements of the phone like the lock button are made from ocean-bound plastic. But that's about it. So unless you're already familiar with the S23 Ultra's new color options, which include cream, lavender, green, and black, even when you look at the S22 and S23 Ultra side by side, it's almost impossible to tell them apart. As for performance, the S23 Ultra is one of the first phones on the market to feature a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip. However, Samsung didn't stop there because it worked with Qualcomm to create a custom version of the processor just for Galaxy phones. So what does that get you? Simply, a wealth of speed. In tests, the S23 Ultra posted multi-core scores in Geekbench 5 that were 40% higher than what we got from last year's phone. That's a huge jump, so it probably isn't a surprise when I tell you that everything feels smooth. Apps, games, you name it. Now, I should mention that the custom Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy platform that Samsung uses has a clock speed that's only around 150 MHz higher than the standard chip, which honestly isn't a difference most people, including me, can really discern in normal use. That said, one of the biggest changes for 2023 is that every version of this year's Ultra will feature a Snapdragon chip. So people outside North America won't be saddled with a less powerful Exynos processor like in previous years. As for the rest of the phone specs, the base model features 8 GB of RAM and 256 GB of storage. But if you move up from there, you'll get 12 GB of memory and up to a whopping 1 TB of room for apps and media. Alongside the debut of the Galaxy S23 line, Samsung is also introducing One UI 5.1, which features some handy tweaks and customizations. That said, a number of additions like the new personalization options on the lock screen or a wider palette for the UI's accent colors are sort of things we've seen before in iOS 16 or Android 13's Material You. You can even do things like add info to the lock screen so it's easier for people to return your device to you if you lose it. Samsung is making it easier to create custom stickers from your photos, which you can do simply by long pressing on an object and then dragging it to another app for easy sharing. Unfortunately, some subjects are easier to clip than others. Faces and animals tend to work relatively well, but other things like flowers can often end up looking a bit off, so your results may vary. There's also a new modes and routines section in the menu that lets the phone adjust multiple settings for specific activities like exercising or relaxing. But aside from the sleep mode option, I didn't really find this new functionality all that useful. Look, when I work out, all I need to do is find some good music and I'm good to go. There's no need to complicate things. Unfortunately, while the S23 Ultra comes with an S Pen and a handy storage slot, there aren't really any new note-taking or drawing features, which is kind of a shame. Samsung's top-end handset is still unmatched when it comes to stylus support on phones, so I wish there was anything new to mess around with. But I must admit, even I'm struggling to think of a major feature I'd really like to see added, so it's hard to blame Samsung too much for that one. The biggest upgrade on the S23 Ultra is its new 200 megapixel main sensor, which features twice as many pixels as before. At Samsung Unpacked, the company showed off snippets of short films from not one, but two big-name directors to really drive home the phone's new cinematic capabilities, which does sound impressive. But in practice, it takes a bit of effort to really make the most of that new sensor. In normal use, the S23 Ultra uses 16:1 pixel binning to help gather more light and produce sharp, colorful images without the need for extra large file sizes. And in most situations, it produces better looking pics too. When I used the S23 Ultra to shoot photos of some pizza, which was extremely tasty I might add, images taken using the default 12 megapixel mode featured more accurate colors and better details than those captured with the sensor's full 200 megapixels. That said, in the right conditions, activating the sensor's full resolution may allow you to capture finer textures on trickier subjects, but you'll need to zoom in to see them. Now, part of this is because it seems Samsung's object detection and optimizer doesn't work when the 200 megapixel mode is activated. But I also noticed that in other shots, there are noticeable differences in things like white balance and sharpness. On one hand, this makes sense because pro photographers often prefer images with flatter color profiles, as that makes touching them up in post a bit easier. But that also means, unless you're editing everything you shoot in an app like Lightroom or Photoshop, you're probably better off sticking with the regular 12 megapixel photo setting. This is sort of what I mean when I say you really need to work to get the most out of the S23 Ultra's new camera. And it applies to other stuff, like some of the new capabilities in Samsung's Expert RAW app too. Designed for more advanced photographers, Expert RAW has a much wider array of settings and tools to help you tweak every aspect of your shot, from shutter speed to exposure compensation and more. You also get a new astrophotography mode, so you can take better pics of the night sky. That is, unless you live in the city like I do. That's because between light pollution and cloudy skies, I couldn't get a single photo with the astrophotography mode that I was really proud of during the whole time I tested the phone. And I even used a tripod to make sure things were super stable. That means just to even put yourself in a decent setting for astrophotography, you may need to drive hours away in the night with a bunch of gear. And at that point, I kind of feel like you might as well buy yourself a real camera. It's a similar story when it comes to video, where the S23 Ultra's improved OIS is a welcome addition for reducing shakes and vibrations while recording. But then there's the new 8K 30 FPS mode, which is up from 8K 24 FPS last year, which is nice because there's no severe 2x crop like you got on the S22 Ultra. But at the same time, who is recording home movies in 8K? I mean, honestly, let alone having the proper display to watch those clips at full resolution. Sure, it's nice to be able to crop in when you want some extra detail, but this feature really feels like overkill, especially when you consider that the file size for a 2-minute 8K 30 FPS video is over 1 gigabyte, which means you're gonna run out of storage real fast. At least when it comes to selfies, the phone has a new 12 megapixel camera with dual pixel autofocus, and its pics look great, despite a sensor that actually features a lower resolution than on the previous model. Elsewhere, the 12 megapixel ultra-wide cam and the two telephoto lenses, 3x and 10x, are largely the same, which feels kind of like a missed opportunity because that 10x optical zoom is still my favorite lens on the entire phone. While the S23 Ultra's smaller siblings both got upgrades in battery capacity, Samsung's flagship stayed pat at 5,000 milliamp hours. But that's okay, because even so, there's plenty of juice to go around. On our video rundown test, the S23 Ultra lasted an impressive 19 hours and 26 minutes, which is similar to the OnePlus 11 at 1945, though not quite as good as the iPhone 14 Plus's 2117. And that was with the phone's adapted refresh rate turned on. Meanwhile, in the real world, you're looking at more than all-day battery life. Even on a day when I was doing heavy benchmarking while playing NBA All World, which really gulps down electrons due to constant use of GPS, I still had 25% battery left at the end of the day. And on days with more moderate usage, I often had 40% or more in the tank when midnight rolled around. All this means you don't really need to worry about the phone dying during the day, which is a good thing because that gives the S23 Ultra leeway to donate some charge to other devices via Samsung's PowerShare feature, aka reverse wireless charging. And with 45-watt wire charging, you can refuel the phone in a jiffy too. The tricky thing about recommending the S23 Ultra is that it's everything a super premium phone should be. It's got a gorgeous display, a great build, and more performance than you know what to do with. However, starting at $1,200, it's also really expensive, and it's not that much better than last year's offering. I have no doubt you can film Hollywood-grade movies using its new 200-megapixel sensor, but it's important to remember that even in Samsung's promos, we're talking about a crew with decades of experience, not to mention the use of additional equipment like external mics, camera cages, gimbals, and more. The S23 Ultra's camera has tons of potential, but it takes more than just a casual familiarity to make those features glow. So, for those wondering if they should trade in their current handset after only a year, just know it's not worth it. If you're simply looking for a premium device and you don't care about taking notes, I'd argue that the Pixel 7 Pro is a better deal. But if you have an older phone and are looking for a major upgrade, the S23 Ultra is unlike any other Android phone on sale today. And with its fancy new sensor, Samsung's latest flagship might be the closest thing you can get to a pro-grade camera phone, just as long as you're willing to polish your content in post. But what do you think? When was the last time you upgraded your phone? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more news, videos, and reviews real soon.